Good afternoon, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the launch of Astra's Rocket 3.3 launch vehicle from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. I'm Stephen Clark, editor of Spaceflight Now, reporting live from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Our location is about 1.7 or 1.8 miles away from Launch Complex 46, where Astra's Rocket 3.3 vehicle is vertical at this time. In this view of Space Launch Complex 46, the Astra rocket is just to the right of that tower in the center of your view. This launch vehicle stands just 43 feet or 13 meters tall, so it's significantly shorter than most launch vehicles that fly from Florida Space Coast. So you're not getting the spectacular view from a distance that you would normally get. However, the rocket is there. You can just make out the top of the payload fairing in this view. This view, again, of Space Launch Complex 46 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Those two towers you see are lightning protection masts used to protect rockets when they're vertical on this launch complex. And Astra's rocket is just to the right of that center tower in this view. Again, a very short launch vehicle, and by launch vehicle standards, at 43 feet in height. The countdown is now approaching T-minus 58 minutes and counting. Weather conditions are all green at this time. There's an overcast cloud deck over the Space Coast at this time at a level of around 500 to 1,000 feet. So we expect that cloud deck to thin out over time throughout the launch window this afternoon. But all weather parameters are currently green, so the countdown is currently targeting a liftoff at the opening of the 3-hour window at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, or 1800 UTC. Now T-minus 55 minutes and counting. This will be the first flight by Astra from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This follows a series of test flights. The company has flown out of a launch complex on Kodiak Island in Alaska. At this time, Astra confirms that propellants are being loaded into the 43-foot tall Rocket 3.3 launch vehicle out at pad 46. Kerosene and liquid oxygen will be loaded into the rocket over the next hour, or less than an hour now, until liftoff time, to feed the 5 main engines on the first stage and single engine on the second stage. Some vapors now visible streaming away from the launch vehicle at this time, indicating that propellant load is underway. This is the 5th orbital launch attempt by Astra in the company's history. 3 previous test flights back in September 2020, December 2020, and August 2021 from Kodiak Island, Alaska, suffered problems before reaching orbit and were unable to achieve orbital velocity. However, the company's most recent flight, back on November 20th, 2021, successfully placed a dummy payload into orbit for the United States Space Force. And this is Astra's first flight, again, from Cape Canaveral, and it's also the first flight by Astra to carry functioning satellites into orbit. There are 4 CubeSats on board, each about the size of a toaster oven or shoebox, developed by university research teams as well as NASA's Johnson Space Center. Once again, you're looking live at Space Launch Complex 46. You can just see the top segment of Astra's launch vehicle peeking above the tree line in this view. We are at the closest possible viewing location for personnel here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, on the base at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. However, the launch vehicle is once again the smallest ever to fly, smallest orbital class launch vehicle ever to fly from Cape Canaveral in the nearly 7 decades of launch history here at the Florida Space Coast. It's 43 feet tall, 52 inches in diameter. You're just seeing the top of the payload shroud where those 4 CubeSats are stowed inside, encapsulated, waited for liftoff at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, or 1800 UTC. Again, the 2 large towers you see with the flashing lights are lightning protection masts. Those stand around Space Launch Complex 46 to protect rockets while they're on the pad from lightning strikes. Lightning, fairly common occurrence here in Central Florida, although there's not much of a risk of lightning today. There is an overcast cloud deck less than 1,000 feet above the surface at this time. These clouds are expected to burn off through the afternoon. However, they may remain in place for liftoff if liftoff remains targeted for 1 p.m. Eastern. Now approaching T-minus 51 minutes and counting. There are cumulus and thick cloud rules in place enforced by the United States Space Force, which runs the eastern range here at Cape Canaveral. However, those weather rules are not in violation right now. These clouds are not thick enough and do not have the characteristics to violate those cumulus and thick cloud rules. So all conditions are green. Winds are much lighter today than they were on Saturday. Just to recap, if you joined us on Saturday, the launch was scrubbed Saturday afternoon due to a range radar that was unavailable. This radar is a mandatory asset to track the rocket as it climbs into space for range safety reasons, so range safety officials can make sure that the rocket is on the proper trajectory and doesn't risk population or doesn't risk property during its climb into orbit. The rocket has a safety system, a flight termination system that would be activated to terminate the flight and destroy the rocket if it did veer off course, and this radar is a critical asset to make sure that it is within the pre-approved flight corridor. Now T-minus 49 minutes and 30 seconds. Once again, this is the fifth orbital launch attempt by Astra in the company's history. The company was founded back in 2016. It's headquartered out in Alameda, California. This is the third flight to utilize this particular configuration of Astra's launch vehicle family. This is called the Rocket 3.3 configuration. Stands 43 feet tall. And this is the first Astra mission to originate from Florida. The company's previous test flights, including the company's first successful orbital mission, all launched from Pacific Spaceport Launch Complex in Kodiak Island, Alaska. Again, you've been looking live at Pad 46. This is the fourth orbital launch from this facility, following previous missions, two by Athena rockets back in 1998 and 1999. This was the departure point for NASA's Lunar Prospector mission, which flew to the moon and surveyed the moon's poles, looking for signs of water ice. And this is the first Astra mission of the year, and it's the seventh orbital launch out of Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and Kennedy Space Center to start the year. 5 previous missions this year by SpaceX already in the books, and United Launch Alliance has launched one Atlas V rocket back in January. So this is the seventh flight, seventh rocket flight to take off from Cape Canaveral to start 2022. Now T-minus 47 minutes and 50 seconds. You're looking again at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46, where Astra's Rocket 3.3 rocket is standing vertical. In this view, it doesn't peek out above the tree line much. It's only 43 feet tall, so it's the shortest orbital class rocket to ever fly out of Cape Canaveral. The rocket is just to the right of that large lightning tower near the center of your view. Countdown remains on schedule for a liftoff at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 1800 UTC. You're looking now at a live view provided by Astra and their streaming partner NASA Spaceflight, showing an up-close view of the Astra Rocket 3.3 rocket out on Pad 46. You can see those liquid oxygen vapors streaming away from the rocket and the strongback, and frost building up on that aluminum outer skin of the first stage, indicating that liquid oxygen, which is chilled to several hundred degrees below zero, is currently being loaded into the rocket. Now T-minus 43 minutes and 30 seconds. Once again, you're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46, where Astra's Rocket 3.3 vehicle is vertical and being loaded with propellants at this time. In this view, the Rocket 3.3 vehicle is just to the right of that large tower in this view of Pad 46. The payload fairing is just peeking above the tree line in this view. That's the very top of this 43-foot tall rocket. This rocket, again, more than 5 times shorter than a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, so not the very large launch vehicle you're used to seeing flying from Cape Canaveral. So this view shows it behind that tree line, but at liftoff, the rocket will be emerging from those trees and flying just to the right of that lightning tower as it climbs into space this afternoon. This view, taken by Astra's launch photographer John Krause, shows an aerial view taken earlier in the launch campaign of Pad 46. This shows the Astra Rocket 3.3 on its launch pedestal at Space Launch Complex 46. Astra brings its launch infrastructure and rocket from its headquarters out in Alameda, California, ships those containers, those pieces of infrastructure in standard-sized shipping containers that can be towed by a tractor-trailer system along the roads across the country. So Astra deploys all of its ground infrastructure, its rocket, all in those shipping containers, and uses less than a dozen employees that ship out to each launch site to set up the infrastructure, set up the rocket, and encapsulate those payloads on top of the rocket inside a mobile clean room. All that done by fewer than a dozen engineers and technicians. This view of Pad 46 shows its proximity to the Atlantic Ocean, just inland from the coast of Cape Canaveral. The launch pad is near the easternmost tip of Cape Canaveral. This view also shows those 2 lightning towers used to protect the rocket from lightning, as well as a mobile gantry structure that's been used by previous rockets that have flown from this pad. However, again, Astra brings all of its infrastructure with it as it comes to each launch site, and that gantry was not used for this launch campaign. This pad has hosted 3 previous orbital launches, 2 Athena rockets back in 1998, 1999. Most recently, the last orbital launch from this pad was a Minotaur 4 rocket carrying a Defense Department payload into orbit back in August of 2017. And actually the most recent use of the pad was NASA's Orion ascent abort test, an abort test of NASA's Orion crew capsule to test the vehicle's launch escape system, these rockets that would be used to carry the capsule away from its space launch system heavy lift rocket during flight in the event of an anomaly. That flight back in July 2019 was the most recent use of this pad. That was an atmospheric suborbital test flight of the Orion spacecraft. Again, you're looking live at Space Launch Complex 46 under gray skies at this time. The cloud level has been lifting throughout the day, however, it does remain overcast. All weather rules, though, are currently green for launch. No weather constraints being tracked at this time. Now, less than 40 minutes until liftoff. The launch is currently targeted for 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 1800 UTC, the opening of a 3-hour launch window on the Eastern Range this afternoon. Now T-minus 35 minutes and counting. The countdown continues to tick down to a T0 or launch time of 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time or 1800 UTC. Astra reports that the countdown is going very smoothly today. Weather parameters remain green. No technical issues being noted in the countdown net or by Astra officials at this time. Everything looking good for a liftoff at 1 o'clock, the opening of the 3-hour launch window this afternoon here on the Eastern Range at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The countdown just passed the T-minus 31 minute mark. You're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. This view of the Astra Rocket 3.3 comes from our location about 1.7 miles away from the launch site. This is the closest viewing site available here on the base at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, just outside the hazard area around the rocket. That hazard area extends roughly a mile or so around the launch site. Our location on the roof of an old blockhouse at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. 1.7 miles away from Space Launch Complex 46. This rocket is 43 feet tall, or 13 meters tall, so it's less than 1/5 the height of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. Much smaller than rockets that you're used to seeing fly from the Space Coast of Florida. In fact, this will be the smallest orbital class rocket to ever launch from Florida. That dates back to the very first satellite launch from Cape Canaveral back in January 1958. This mission carrying 4 CubeSats, each the size of a toaster oven or shoebox, for university research teams around the United States, as well as NASA's Johnson Space Center. NASA booked this mission with Astra through the agency's Venture Class Launch Services program, which allows NASA to book rides for CubeSats on emerging small rockets, commercial rockets developed by U.S. industry. NASA has flown similar missions in the past with Rocket Lab and Virgin Orbit, and this is NASA's first mission with Astra. NASA also has future venture class missions booked with Relativity Space and Firefly. Now T-minus 28 minutes and counting. At this time, Astra's launch control team is loading software programs into the engine controllers on the Astra Rocket 3.3 vehicle. These operating parameters will be used by the computers in the engines to control their performance during the flight. The flight will last around 9 minutes from the time of liftoff until deployment of the 4 CubeSats into a 310-mile high or 500-kilometer orbit. The countdown now at T-minus 26 minutes and 20 seconds. Once again, this mission carrying 4 CubeSats into orbit for NASA's Venture Class Launch Services program. These CubeSats are developed by university research teams as well as NASA's Johnson Space Center. This view shows a photo of a student from the University of California at Berkeley working with their CubeSat mission. CubeSat with a Q is a small spacecraft that will test a new design of a gyroscope made of diamonds. This diamond gyroscope will offer more precise and more cost-effective means for small satellites to determine their orientation in space. These gyroscopes are used in most spacecraft to determine which way they're pointing while they're in orbit. And the diamond gyroscope being tested on the CubeSat, again CubeSat with a Q. This diamond gyroscope has a smaller form factor, smaller dimensions that allow them to fit into small satellites such as nanosatellites and CubeSats. Another spacecraft on this mission is named BAMA 1, developed by students at the University of Alabama. This is a 3-unit CubeSat that will demonstrate a drag sail device. This is a drag brake, basically, that will deploy from the spacecraft after it arrives in orbit. That will create aerodynamic drag to allow the spacecraft to drop out of orbit faster than it would otherwise fall out of orbit from the natural effect of drag. These drag sail devices could be used by small satellites to allow them to passively drop out of orbit after the end of their missions and help eliminate the creation of space debris. Another spacecraft on this mission is called R5S1. It's developed by NASA's Johnson Space Center. This mission is the first CubeSat to be developed at Johnson Space Center, and it gives engineers there practice assembling and testing small satellites. It's also testing technologies that could be used for in-space inspection. This inspection capability could be useful for future human spaceflight missions to allow astronauts to essentially pitch a small satellite out of an airlock to inspect their spacecraft, the exterior of their spacecraft, without having to go out on a spacewalk. So this is a very interesting and promising capability for future human spaceflight missions. The other mission, the fourth and final CubeSat on this flight, is the Ionospheric Neutron Content Analyzer, or INCA, from New Mexico State University. This is also a 3-unit CubeSat. It carries a directional neutron spectrometer developed by NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. The mission, according to NASA, will contribute to understanding the radiation environment that satellites encounter, as well as a phenomenon known as neutron air showers, which pose a radiation hazard to occupants of a high-altitude aircraft, as well as small satellites in low Earth orbit. Again, you're looking at a live view now of Launch Complex 46. This view, an up-close shot provided by Astra and their streaming partner, NASA Spaceflight, showing the vapors of gaseous oxygen venting away from the Rocket 3.3 vehicle on the pad. Now less than 23 minutes from liftoff time, liftoff of Astra's small satellite launcher remains scheduled for 1 o'clock Eastern Time, 1800 UTC. Again, Astra's control team is actually monitoring the countdown from a control room at Alameda, California, where the company is headquartered. A small team of engineers there in the control center are overseeing the countdown from more than 2,000 miles away. Astra only deploys a small team of technicians to each launch site, such as Kodiak Island in Alaska for its previous missions and Cape Canaveral for today's mission, to actually do the hands-on work to set up the rocket and ground infrastructure. The rest of the work is all done remotely, so Astra says they only need a concrete pad, and an electrical hookup, and a data connection, an internet connection essentially, to set up a rocket from an austere launch pad, more or less anywhere in the world. And so far, Astra has demonstrated launching from Alaska and Florida, and plans to launch from other sites in the future. Now T-minus 17 minutes and counting. Again, you're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Astra's Rocket 3.3 launch vehicle is visible just to the right of that large tower in the center of your view. That large tower, along with one on the left side of the view, are lightning protection masts. Those help ensure the rocket is not damaged by lightning while it's on the launch pad. The Astra Rocket 3.3 vehicle is only 43 feet or 13 meters tall. It's the smallest orbital class rocket to ever fly out of Cape Canaveral. That record dates back to January 1958, when the Explorer 1 spacecraft became the first satellite ever launched by the United States, launched from a pad not far from Pad 46 here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. But Astra's Rocket 3.3 vehicle is smaller than any orbital class rocket to have ever flown from the spaceport here in Florida. Now passing T-minus 16 minutes. In the next few minutes, we expect to hear Astra's launch team out in Alameda, California go through their final pre-flight poll. All stations on the countdown loop will report a go or no-go status for proceeding into the terminal countdown. That terminal countdown is due to begin at T-minus 10 minutes. Now T-minus 15 minutes and 30 seconds and counting. Again, it is overcast currently here at Cape Canaveral with a cloud deck overhead covering the entire sky. The clouds have lifted somewhat over the last few hours. However, it does remain overcast, so the rocket will likely disappear from view in the first minute or so of the flight. But all weather rules are currently observed green. There is no violation of any weather constraint right now for Astra's Rocket 3.3 mission. Now T-minus 14 minutes. Again, this mission is part of NASA's Venture Class Launch Services program. 4 CubeSats are on board. One developed by the University of California at Berkeley, one from the University of Alabama, one from New Mexico State University, and one from NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. This mission is designated VCLS Demo 2A for NASA's Venture Class Launch Services program. Again, the Venture Class Launch Services program allows NASA to book rides for their small CubeSat satellites into low Earth orbit on a variety of emerging commercial small satellite vehicles. Venture Class missions previously flown by NASA have ridden on Rocket Lab and Virgin Orbit rockets. This mission is flying on Astra's Rocket 3.3. Future NASA VCLS missions are reserved for flights on Firefly and Relativity rockets in the future, later this year. Passing T-minus 13 minutes and counting. Everything looking good in the countdown. The Astra countdown loop is fairly quiet at this time. However, the pre-launch poll is just a couple of minutes away, and we'll hear the launch director out in California check with each member of his team to make sure they're ready for the terminal countdown and launch at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, or 1800 UTC. Now T-minus 12 minutes and 3 seconds. We're positioned On the roof of an old blockhouse at Launch Complex 9 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, this view shows the immediate viewing area around 1.7 miles away from Pad 46. We're looking to the northeast toward the launch pad. Again, this is our location where we're broadcasting from today. The countdown now passing T-minus 11 minutes and 40 seconds. The pre-launch poll is just a few moments away. And Astra is reporting the countdown is now holding. We'll await to hear the reason for the hold. However, this would suggest the launch will not happen at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The company has a 3-hour launch window available today. That launch window extends to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You can see in our view the clock has indeed stopped at T-minus 11 minutes and 8 seconds. This hold coming just moments before we did expect to hear the Astra launch team go through their pre-flight poll. Once again, if you're just joining us, you're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46, where Astra's Rocket 3.3 vehicle is awaiting a liftoff this afternoon. Once again, the countdown is in a hold at T-minus 11 minutes and 46 seconds. Astra says the hold was called to do an evaluation of their wind limits. However, we can confirm that the ground winds at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station are currently observed green. There's been no report, however, on upper level winds, so we're not sure if that's the issue that Astra is tracking. Once again, you're looking live at Space Launch Complex 46 here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida, where Astra's Rocket 3.3 is currently vertical, awaiting a launch attempt this afternoon. The countdown is currently in a hold at about T-minus 11 minutes. That hold was called moments before the Astra launch team was to begin their pre-flight poll, their go-no-go poll for authority to enter the terminal countdown and proceed with launch. Astra says the team is evaluating some wind limits before proceeding with the countdown this afternoon. Astra's Rocket 3.3 stands 43 feet or 13.1 meters tall. It's 52 inches or 1.3 meters in diameter. These specifications and measurements make it the smallest orbital class rocket to ever fly from Cape Canaveral since the very first successful orbital launch back in 1958. There are 5 Delphin main engines on the first stage. These engines burn kerosene and liquid oxygen propellants. The 5 Delphin engines will produce 32,500 pounds of total thrust to send the Rocket 3.3 off the pad and into orbit this afternoon. There's one upper stage engine. It's called the Ether engine. It produces around 740 pounds of thrust in the vacuum of space. And it also burns kerosene and liquid oxygen propellants. Those propellants have been loaded into the rocket over the last hour or so. And the terminal countdown is due to begin at T-minus 10 minutes. However, the countdown once again has been paused. It's in a hold just before the entrance or beginning of that terminal countdown. The launch window is now officially open. The clock just hit 1 p.m. Eastern time, so this is the opening of the 3-hour launch window this afternoon. The window extends till 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 2100 UTC. We haven't heard a new target launch time yet, but we'll pass that along when we hear it from Astra. But there's plenty of time to work this issue and resume the countdown for another try at launch this afternoon. The countdown has been recycled to T-minus 15 minutes and holding. Stay tuned for further updates as we wait for word from Astra on the status of the countdown and whether the launch will proceed this afternoon. Weather, again, is currently green for launch. Astra did report that the reason for the hold was to check some wind limits. We're not sure if they're referring to upper level winds. The ground winds here at Cape Canaveral are currently within limits for launch this afternoon, as are all the other weather parameters. It remains overcast, however, the cloud deck is lifting. Again, you're looking live at Space Launch Complex 46. Astra's Rocket 3.3 vehicle is standing near the center of your screen. It's just to the right of that large tower. The launch vehicle stands just 43 feet tall. It's more than 5 times shorter than a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. So it's quite small by rocket standards, so you're not seeing it visible very far above the tree line. However, we will see the rocket emerge from the trees as soon as it lifts off, and we'll be able to track it until it likely disappears into the cloud deck sometime in the first minute of the flight. The countdown continues to hold at T-minus 15 minutes. We're waiting for a word from Astra on when the countdown will be able to resume. At that point, we'll have a new target launch time to share. Once the Astra Rocket 3.3 rocket lifts off, it'll head northeast over the Atlantic Ocean. At 6 seconds after launch, it'll begin a pitch-over maneuver. Those 5 Delphin engines burning kerosene and liquid oxygen will be producing more than 32,000 pounds of thrust. Heading northeast again over the Atlantic Ocean at T plus 1 minute 10 seconds, it'll pass the period of max Q, the moment of maximum aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle as it accelerates through the thick atmosphere. At T plus 2 minutes and 50 seconds, the launch vehicle's first stage engines will cut off. 5 seconds later, the payload fairing will be jettisoned to reveal the CubeSats loaded on top of the rocket once the vehicle reaches space and flies above the atmosphere. 5 seconds later, at T plus 3 minutes, will be the moment of stage separation. That's when the first stage aluminum first stage vehicle will jettison. It'll fall back into the Atlantic Ocean. It'll be expended. And at T plus 3 minutes and 5 seconds will be the moment of ignition of the second stage's ether engine, that engine producing 740 pounds of thrust. It'll burn for nearly 5.5 minutes. And at T plus 8.5 minutes, the ether engine will switch off. At that point, the rocket should be in orbit. It'll be targeting an orbit at 310 miles or 500 kilometers at an inclination of 41 degrees to the equator. The payload deployment command is expected at T plus 8 minutes and 40 seconds. These CubeSats are mounted inside carriers, so the payload deployment will just simply consist of an opening of a door on each of these carriers, and that will allow the CubeSats to be spring ejected into space. It's a rather simple deployment mechanism used for these CubeSat missions. This map shows the expected ground track of the Astra Rocket 3.3 vehicle as it heads into orbit. Again, it'll be heading northeast. The launch azimuth is at 57 degrees, heading downrange. It'll fly this corridor to target that orbit at an inclination of 41 degrees to the equator. The inclination meaning that the spacecraft and the upper stage will be injected into an orbit that moves between 41 degrees north and 41 degrees south latitude. This trajectory in red shows the rocket's expected course over the Atlantic Ocean. It'll pass just north of Bermuda before deploying those 4 CubeSats for the University of California, Berkeley, New Mexico State University, the University of Alabama, and NASA's Johnson Space Center. Again, the target altitude of the orbit for today's mission is 310 miles or 500 kilometers. You're looking once again at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46, where Astra's Rocket 3.3 is standing vertical. It's been fueled with propellants. In this view, it's near the center of your screen. Just the top part of the payload fairing is emerging from behind the tree line, just to the right of that large tower. Those 2 towers are lightning towers that protect the rocket from the risk of lightning and lightning strikes, which are a fairly common occurrence here in Central Florida. There is no threat of lightning, no risk of lightning today. All the weather parameters are green. We're waiting word from Astra on the status of the hold, and we'll let you know when the countdown resumes and a new target launch time when we have it. Astra's launch countdown remains holding at T-minus 15 minutes. Astra says the launch team is evaluating some wind data. Presumably this has to do with upper level winds. We know ground winds are within limits at this time. The Astra team reports they are optimistic to be able to proceed with a launch countdown and a mission today. However, they're just taking their time to review wind data to make sure everything is good to go for launch. The window today extends until 4 p.m. Eastern Time, or 2100 UTC, so there's plenty of time for the Astra engineers out in California to check and make sure everything is ready, to verify winds are acceptable for flight, and then pick up the countdown for these final 15 minutes and proceed into the terminal countdown, which begins at T-minus 10 minutes, and then ultimately liftoff. This mission, again, is carrying 4 CubeSats into orbit for NASA's Venture Class Launch Services Program and NASA's Educational Launch of Nanosatellite Program, or ELANA. This mission is officially designated VCLS Demo 2A. Also carries the designation ELANA 41 for these 2 NASA programs that are involved in launching these CubeSats on Astra's commercial satellite launcher. So as the countdown remains holding at T-minus 15 minutes, we'll stand by and bring you any updates we receive on the countdown and a new target launch time. For those of you just joining us, the countdown is holding at T-minus 15 minutes. However, the launch is not scrubbed. The Astra launch team is evaluating some wind data to make sure all is good, all is looking good for launch this afternoon. So there's plenty of time to work this issue. The countdown, the launch window extends until 4 p.m. Eastern Time, or 2100 UTC. So we'll continue bringing you this live view of Launch Complex 46, where Astra's Rocket 3.3 is awaiting a launch opportunity this afternoon here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. You're continuing to look at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46, where Astra's Rocket 3.3 launch vehicle is awaiting liftoff this afternoon. The countdown continues to hold at T-minus 15 minutes. Astra called a hold at just inside the T-minus 12-minute mark, as it was targeting a launch at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That countdown stopped just inside of 12 minutes before liftoff, just before we expected to hear the Astra launch team go through their pre-launch poll. The countdown has recycled to T-minus 15 minutes. Astra says engineers are evaluating some wind data before proceeding with the countdown this afternoon. They're optimistic that this wind data will check out and allow for a launch before the closure of the launch window this afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, or 2100 UTC. There's no update yet from Astra on exactly when within this window the liftoff will be rescheduled. There are 4 CubeSats on board for U.S. universities as well as NASA. All 4 CubeSats are part of NASA's CubeSat launch initiative and Educational Launch of Nanosatellites program, or LANA program. NASA regularly selects CubeSat proposals from universities and research institutions around the country. For launch, NASA then pays for their launch through the CubeSat Launch Initiative program and assigns each CubeSat to a rocket, often either carrying them to the International Space Station for deployment outside of that complex in low Earth orbit, or putting them on rideshare missions, riding along with other payloads on small rockets such as Rocket Lab's Electron and now Astra's Rocket 3.3. They've also launched on Virgin Orbit missions. They've launched as rideshare payloads on SpaceX missions, on Antares rockets, and they've also launched as secondary payloads on ULA's Atlas V rocket. In this view, the Rocket 3.3 vehicle is near the center of your view. Just to the right of that large tower, that large truss-like structure, is a launch protection mast that helps protect the rocket while it's on the launch pad from lightning. Those 2 towers are connected by a catenary wiring system to help distribute electrical charges if there's a lightning strike at the pad. Distributes that electrical charge away from the rocket to ensure that there's no damage to the rocket from an electrical storm. This is Astra's first launch from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It follows a series of test flights that the company has flown from Kodiak Island in Alaska. The company's most recent flight back in November was the first Astra mission to successfully achieve orbit. That was on a test flight for the U.S. Space Force. It carried a dummy payload into orbit from Kodiak Island in Alaska. This is the first Astra mission to actually carry functioning payloads on board. Functioning satellites are closed up inside the payload fairing. The payload fairing is the part of the rocket you can see in this view, just visible above the tree line from our vantage point, around 1.7 or 1.8 miles away from the launch pad. It's now 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Now 30 minutes into today's 3-hour launch window. 2.5 hours remaining in the window, which extends until 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 2100 UTC. And the countdown has resumed at T-minus 15 minutes. Liftoff now targeted for 1:50 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 1850 UTC. Astra now confirms that the countdown has resumed. The first stage fuel tank is confirmed full of kerosene fuel at this time. Liquid oxygen continues to be loaded into the rocket through the rest of the countdown. Liftoff targeted for exactly 1:50 and 0 seconds Eastern Standard Time. That's 1850 UTC for those of you in other time zones. Weather continues to be green here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It is still overcast, but the clouds have lifted somewhat since earlier this morning. Visibility has improved. So we expect to have a great view of the launch of Astra's Rocket 3.3 from our vantage point about 1.8 miles away here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Liftoff now 13 minutes and 30 seconds away. T-minus 12 minutes and 20 seconds. As the countdown now passes T-minus 11 minutes and 30 seconds, we'll bring you a replay of the Astra static fire test. This static fire test occurred back on January 22nd, Saturday morning at 11:40 a.m. Eastern Time. This involved the test firing of the rocket's 5 Delphin engines, while the rocket remained firmly on the ground at Space Launch Complex 46. In this view, you can see the exhaust plume appearing around the base of the rocket out at Complex 46. It was a rather windy and overcast day, much like today here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This is a test firing of the Astra rocket that occurred back on January 22nd. Now looking live at Space Launch Complex again. Astra's launch team out in Alameda, California is about to be polled for a go or no-go for launch. We'll stand by for the poll now. Now T-minus 10 minutes. The final poll from Astra's Launch Control Center in Alameda, California resulted in a unanimous go for launch. Now T-minus 9 minutes and counting. Over the next few minutes, the rocket's flight termination system will be checked and verified ready for flight. This flight termination system is a destruct mechanism that would be used to terminate the flight and destroy the launch vehicle if it veered from its pre-approved flight corridor. That flight corridor is heading northeast from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The launch azimuth is 57 degrees. That flight corridor is the proper trajectory to target an orbit at an altitude of 310 miles or 500 kilometers. We also expect to hear word from the Range Operations Center here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station that the range has given its final authorization for launch. So those are the next major steps in the countdown now. The countdown now approaching T-minus 8 minutes and counting. Now T-minus 8 minutes. After liftoff, the Rocket 3.3 vehicle will head northeast. At T+6 seconds, the rocket will begin a pitch-over maneuver. At 1 minute 10 seconds, the rocket will have already exceeded the speed of sound. It'll reach the point of max Q, or maximum aerodynamic pressure. 5 Delphin engines will power the rocket downrange with more than 32,000 pounds of thrust. Those engines will cut off at T+2 minutes and 50 seconds. 5 seconds later, the payload fairing will jettison to reveal those 4 CubeSats. And staging is at T+3 minutes. Moments later, the second stage's ether engine will ignite for a 5.5-minute burn to reach orbit. And at T+8 minutes and 40 seconds, the payload deployment command should be issued to allow these 4 NASA-sponsored CubeSats to emerge and be spring ejected from their deployment mechanisms. This is a map showing the expected flight trajectory. It'll be heading northeast at an azimuth of 57 degrees, heading toward an orbit 310 miles or 500 kilometers in altitude. We're looking once again at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46. This view from Astra and its streaming partner NASA Spaceflight, showing the vapors of gaseous oxygen venting from the launch vehicle. The final range authorization has given a green status. Range is green for launch now. So the Eastern Range is ready to support today's flight of Astra's Rocket 3.3 launch vehicle, also known as LV0008, and Astra's designator for its launch vehicles. Now T-minus 5 minutes. Again, the flight into orbit will be heading northeast over the Atlantic Ocean targeting an orbit at an altitude of 310 miles or 500 kilometers. That entire flight sequence from liftoff up until payload deployment will last 8 minutes and 40 seconds. Now T minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Now T minus 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Everything continues to look good for the launch countdown. Liftoff remains targeted for 1:50 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 1850 UTC. Again, this is Astra's 5th orbital launch attempt. It's successfully reached orbit in one of those attempts, and this is Astra's first mission to carry functioning operating satellites. Its previous missions only carried dummy payloads. At T minus 2 minutes, we just passed that mark. The flight termination system should now be enabled for flight. At T minus 1 minute 15 seconds, data recorders and downrange telemetry recorders will be verified activated. And at T minus 60 seconds, the vehicle will be switched to internal control. That will mark the point in which the rocket's onboard computer will control the countdown. At T minus 45 seconds, the first stage liquid oxygen tank will be brought to flight pressure. 5 seconds later, the first stage fuel tank will be pressurized. And we'll see the water deluge system at the launch pad switch on at T minus 10 seconds. You'll see that water spray along the launch pad deck to cushion the ground infrastructure from the acoustics of liftoff. Data recordings are now being activated. T minus 60 seconds. T minus 30 seconds. Astra confirms the launch vehicle is at flight tank pressures. Propellant tanks are now pressurized. T minus 10 seconds. T minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And there's been an abort. The launch has been aborted. We saw a puff of exhaust from the rocket. Looked like the engines may have ignited, but the launch countdown did abort just in the final seconds of the countdown. This view of the Astra Rocket 3.3 vehicle is coming from Astra and its streaming partner, NASA Spaceflight. Again, the countdown was aborted in the final moments before liftoff. Astra is evaluating whether it will be able to make another try today. Once again, the launch countdown was aborted at the moment of engine ignition. Astra confirms those engines did ignite. Here's a replay from Astra's launch webcast provided by NASA Spaceflight, showing the water deluge system now becoming active there in this replay. You'll see the engine startup sequence. And there's the engine startup and the abort just after engine ignition. The rocket's onboard computer systems monitor numerous parameters during the final seconds of the countdown. It can call an automatic hold or an abort in the event of any parameter exceeding some pre-approved limits. That appears to be what happened here at 1:50 p.m. Eastern Time as the countdown reached the T0 point. Astra says it has time to recycle for another launch opportunity before the end of the launch window today at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That, of course, is pending an assessment of the reason for the hold or the abort we saw at 1:50 p.m. So we're standing by on news on what caused that abort and confirmation on whether Astra will indeed have an opportunity to resume the countdown and target another launch attempt before the end of the window at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 2100 UTC. Continuing to look at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46 here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Astra's launch countdown is holding at T-minus 15 minutes following a last-second abort as Astra was moments away from launching its Rocket 3.3 vehicle at 1:50 p.m. Eastern Time. Roughly 22 minutes ago, we saw the Delphin engines at the base of the Astra launch vehicle light up briefly, but the rocket's onboard computer triggered an automatic abort, and the rocket was not released for flight. Astra, at last report, said it was evaluating the reason for the abort, and the team was optimistic about trying again before the end of today's launch window. The launch window closes at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 2100 UTC. But again, we haven't heard from Astra in some time, and we haven't heard any news on the reason for the abort or any update on when Astra might target another launch attempt this afternoon. Weather remains favorable for launch here at Cape Canaveral. All weather rules are currently green. It does remain overcast, however the clouds do appear to be thinning, and the overcast deck has lifted since this morning. The visibility has improved throughout the day. Again, this mission is a demonstration flight for NASA's Venture Class Launch Services program. It's carrying 4 CubeSats developed by student teams at the University of California, Berkeley, New Mexico State University, and the University of Alabama, along with a CubeSat from NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. These satellites are a part of technology demonstration programs as well as educational programs. NASA is paying for the launch of these CubeSats under a $3.9 million contract with Astra. This is Astra's first launch from Cape Canaveral following a series of prior test flights from Kodiak Island in Alaska. And this is Astra's first mission also to carry functional operating satellites into orbit. All of the previous test flights carried satellite mock-ups and dummy payloads. This rocket stands 43 feet or 13 meters tall. In this view of pad 46, you can see the top part of the rocket, the payload fairing, just behind the tree line. This rocket is the smallest to ever fly, smallest orbital class rocket to have ever flown from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It's more than 5 times shorter than SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. So it's not looming as large in our camera view as a SpaceX or ULA rocket would. However, you can see the top part of the rocket just behind the tree line in the center of your view. Just to the right of that large truss-like structure, that's a tower that protects the rocket from lightning while it's on the launch pad. Again, today's launch window does extend for another hour and 45 minutes until 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And with the countdown holding at T-minus 15, that gives Astra around 90 minutes to investigate the problem that caused the abort, institute a fix or solution if necessary, and then pick up the countdown. We did just receive an update from Astra that the team is keeping their options open and still holding out hope for another potential launch attempt before the end of today's launch window. No update on the reason for the hold, however. Astra hasn't discussed what data the engineers are looking at or what may have caused the last second abort. However, they say they are keeping their options open. The launch has not been scrubbed for the day yet, and there's still a chance that liftoff of Astra's Rocket 3.3 vehicle could occur before the closure of today's window at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we'll bring you further updates throughout the afternoon as we receive them. Again, you're looking at a live view of Astra's launch vehicle on Pad 46 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. It's now 2:20 p.m. Eastern Time here in Cape Canaveral, Florida. You're looking live at Space Launch Complex 46, where Astra's Rocket 3.3 rocket remains on the pad, awaiting another possible launch attempt this afternoon. Astra's launch window does extend until 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 2100 UTC. Astra's launch countdown continues to hold at T-minus 15 minutes rather. It's been 45 minutes since the countdown was aborted just before liftoff. We did see those Delphin engines at the bottom of the Astra Rocket 3.3 ignite briefly. However, the countdown stopped before liftoff. Astra continues to assess data, investigating the cause for the abort, as well as determine whether there will be time to recycle for another launch attempt today before the end of the launch window, which is at 4 p.m. Eastern Time or 2100 UTC. There's been no update from Astra on the reason for the cause of the abort. We hope to get that from Astra at some point, but so far they haven't disclosed that. They may still be investigating, but we'll stand by for news on that. We're looking live at Space Launch Complex 46, where Astra's Rocket 3.3 is standing vertical. This rocket stands 43 feet or 13.1 meters tall. It's 52 inches or 1.3 meters in diameter. These measurements make the Rocket 3.3 vehicle the smallest orbital class rocket to ever have launched from Cape Canaveral. 5 Delphin first stage engines are mounted at the bottom of that rocket. Each of these engines burn kerosene and liquid oxygen propellants, and together they will produce 32,500 pounds of thrust at liftoff. For comparison, that's more than 50 times a lower thrust. The thrust level of this rocket is 50 times lower than the full power level of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. There's one engine named the Ether on the second stage, also consuming kerosene and liquid oxygen propellants. So once again, Astra's Rocket 3.3 is the launch vehicle that's awaiting a liftoff from Cape Canaveral's Complex 46 launch pad this afternoon. The launch window extends until 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 2100 UTC. And with the clock holding at T-minus 15 minutes, the countdown will need to pick up by 3:45 p.m. or 2045 UTC in order to make a launch attempt before the end of the window. The weather this afternoon is favorable for launch. The clouds overhead are overcast. There is a deck of cloud cover blanketing the Space Coast at this time. However, those clouds are not in violation of any launch criteria, not too thick, and don't hold sufficient electrical charge to be an issue or a risk for launch today. Winds are also within limits here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. This is the second day Astra has attempted to launch this mission. On Saturday, the launch was scrubbed due to an unavailable radar asset on the Eastern Range. The Eastern Range is the U.S. Space Force's network of infrastructure and tracking infrastructure and safety equipment used to support all rocket launches from Florida Space Coast. A radar necessary to track the rocket was not operating as expected Saturday, so Astra was forced to call a scrub. They targeted a new launch attempt today. The range so far in the countdown has reported its readiness for flight. Weather is green. We're just waiting on Astra to report out on an apparent technical reason for the abort at 1:50 p.m. Eastern Time. If the launch can't get off the ground before 4 p.m. Eastern today, Astra does have a backup opportunity booked on the Eastern Range for tomorrow. However, the weather forecast for Tuesday afternoon is not favorable. The official launch weather outlook calls for an 80% chance of a weather violation tomorrow. The primary weather concerns tomorrow are with thick clouds, cumulus clouds, and also ground winds here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. During the 3-hour window tomorrow, forecasters expect rain showers, winds from the north at 15 to 20 knots, as well as overcast skies overhead. So weather tomorrow does not look favorable for launch. So Astra is doing all they can to try to get this mission off the ground today before 4 p.m. Eastern Time, which is the closure of today's 3-hour launch window. We just received an update from Astra. The launch team, which is based out in Alameda, California at the company's headquarters and launch control center, those launch team members are conducting some final tests to check to see if Astra will be able to pick up the countdown and make another run at launch this afternoon. So no official word yet on whether there will be another attempt. However, Astra hasn't given up hope for getting this mission off the ground before 4 p.m. Eastern Time or 2100 UTC today. Also, no word from Astra on what actually caused the abort back at 1:50 p.m. We hope to receive that from them at some point this afternoon. So we don't know what issue they're working. They're not telling us that at this point, but we'll stand by for an update from Astra on whether another attempt can be made before 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Astra's Rocket 3.3 is there on the launch pad. A earlier launch attempt at 1:50 p.m. Eastern was aborted just prior to liftoff after engine start. Astra says it is looking into the cause of that abort and running some final tests, but we haven't heard any update on the reason the abort was called. At that point in the countdown, an abort would likely have come from the rocket's onboard control system. That onboard computer governs the final minute of the countdown. So no news from Astra on what exactly caused the abort. Also no news on whether there'll be another attempt possible before 4 p.m. Eastern time. That 4 p.m. Eastern time is the moment when the launch window will close. So there is a 3-hour window available today that opened at 1 p.m. It runs till 4 p.m. And with the clock here on the east coast of Florida approaching 3 p.m., there's a little over an hour left in the window. However, the clock is holding at T-minus 15 minutes. That means the clock will have to pick up by 3:45 p.m. or 20:45 UTC to make a launch at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So whatever is being analyzed by Astra at this point needs to be resolved in the next 45 minutes or so to preserve an opportunity to launch today. If the launch doesn't happen today, there's a backup opportunity booked on the Eastern Range here at Cape Canaveral for tomorrow afternoon, same time, 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. However, the weather forecast for tomorrow doesn't look favorable. There is only a 20% chance of acceptable conditions for launch tomorrow afternoon, according to the official outlook issued this morning from the 45th Weather Squadron here at Cape Canaveral. Weather concerns tomorrow include thick clouds, cumulus clouds, and ground winds. Forecasters expect a high chance of rain showers in the area. Winds will be out of the north, gusting up to 20 knots, and multiple levels of clouds expected over the Space Coast tomorrow. So Astra is hoping to launch today to take advantage of the favorable conditions here this afternoon. Clouds are continuing to lift, and the overcast deck blanketing Cape Canaveral this morning was at a low level, less than 1,000 feet. Ceilings this morning reported from weather stations here. That cloud ceiling has gradually risen this afternoon. Visibility has improved. Weather not a factor for launch this afternoon. So we'll await news from Astra on the status of their launch team's testing. The Astra launch team is based in Alameda, California, across the country. That's home of Astra's corporate headquarters as well. So with less than an hour left to go in the launch window this afternoon, we'll stand by for further updates from Astra. We're continuing to look at a live view of Space Launch Complex 46 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. The weather this afternoon continues to improve. The visibility is getting a little better. The haze is starting to burn off now. You're getting a slightly better view of Astra's Rocket 3.3 vehicle. It's just to the right of the large truss-like structure you see in the center of your view. The Astra Rocket 3.3 vehicle is 43 feet tall. That's 13 meters tall. So it doesn't quite fill the frame like other rockets do here on Florida Space Coast. It's more than 5 times shorter than SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. But you can see in this view, the rocket is there. It's still awaiting a launch opportunity, possibly this afternoon. The launch window closes at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or 2100 UTC. The clock is holding at T-minus 15 minutes following an abort just prior to T0 at 1:50 p.m. That abort occurred after ignition of the rocket's 5 Delphin main engines. And Astra is keeping the rocket in a launch-ready status in hopes of picking up the countdown and targeting a new launch time before the close of today's launch window. That clock will need to resume no later than 3:45 p.m. So about 34 minutes or so left available for Astra to work this issue. Astra hasn't disclosed any details or any information about what caused the abort. But the company hasn't given up hope on launching today, as cloud cover overhead is blue sky, the first blue sky we've seen all day here on the Space Coast of Florida. So conditions are improving weather-wise. They've been go all day, but the launch does occur. We do expect to get some better visibility than we would have earlier in the window. Again, this mission is launching 4 CubeSats. These are nanosatellites developed by university teams and research institutions across the country. The satellites on this mission come from the University of California, Berkeley, New Mexico State University, the University of Alabama, and NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. NASA purchased a ride on this rocket for these 4 CubeSats under a $3.9 million launch contract with Astra. Astra's rocket is sized to carry small satellites into orbit, can carry up to 50 kilograms or 110 pounds of payload to low Earth orbit. And we just heard confirmation from Astra that the launch has been scrubbed for the day. Liftoff of Astra's Rocket 3.3 rocket won't be happening today after an abort at just prior to liftoff at 1:50 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. They've spent the last hour and a half or so working the issue, but doesn't look like there will be a launch today. Astra has now confirmed a scrub, so we'll await word from Astra on when there might be another opportunity to launch the mission. Again, the weather conditions tomorrow don't look good. 80% chance of violating one of or multiple launch weather constraints tomorrow, with showers in the area, gusty winds out of the north, and a cloud cover overhead expected tomorrow afternoon. So thank you for joining us for our live coverage of Astra's launch attempt today here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We'll be back again when Astra makes another go at it. And check our website at spaceflightnow.com, as well as our social media feeds for updates on when there will be another launch attempt. Until then, I'm Stephen Clark from Spaceflight Now, reporting from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Have a good afternoon.